Sondos Shabayek. I work as the director of the Bussy Project, a project based in Egypt to document and perform stories of women on stage in the form of monologues. Now, before I go more into the work of the project that I'm heading, I'd just like to give a very brief background about sexual harassment in Egypt. Um, the very first time I remember hearing the term sexual harassment in Arabic, التحرش, I think was back in 2005. And up till 2005, we never used the term. Even if it happens, we would never say, I was sexually harassed or I was harassed. We would always give it another name, a name that does not describe what the incident is. We would call it mu'aksa, which is something similar to catcalling. So this is how unaware, or this is how bad awareness about harassment was up till very recently. Every single girl I've met ever since I started working in the project since 2007 have been sexually harassed on the streets of Cairo, either physically or verbally, but I do not know of any girl or any woman, regardless of her age, that was not harassed. I would like to meet one, but... So this is briefly how things are. Up till 2006, it was not okay for you to say, I got harassed. It was not socially acceptable, whether with friends, family members, or with the public, to say, I was sexually harassed. You would always be questioned, what were you wearing, what were you doing, or what did you say? So this was not exactly a healthy environment for any project to work in. Now, before I go again back to my project, I just want to say that very recently, a new law was passed that finally admits that sexual harassment takes place, addresses sexual harassment as a crime, using actually the term sexual harassment as in التحرش in the legal system. No law ever addressed sexual harassment as a crime by itself. It was always used as an offense, they would call it, or it would be an article inside an article inside an article, and then the lawyer has to prove different things. This is just one of the problems. Even though a new law has passed about sexual harassment in Egypt, I do believe that this is not the answer to the problem, because the problem is a lot bigger. And the reason why a new law in specific would prove futile is because you don't have police officers equipped or aware enough or trained enough to deal with sexual harassment situations. They don't know how to deal with the victims. They don't know how to take in reports properly. For example, if you go to the police station, you're either mocked or told that you should be concerned about your reputation, because as a girl living in a society in Cairo or anywhere in Egypt, reporting a case of being sexually harassed would affect your reputation. So the police officers themselves inside the police station would tell you, oh, think about it again before doing that. So a lot of girls come back with stories to us about how they would try to report being sexually harassed in one way or another on the streets, and then being turned down by the police officers or told to think about it and come again. The project does basically is document and gather stories from women about any experience they've been through in the society. The project started in 2006 as a platform for the women to give a voice for them and allow them to just speak freely and openly about anything they would like to talk about. Now I always get asked, so what are most of the stories about? And my answer is that even though the project is not dedicated completely to sexual harassment, it's because the project was founded and emerged at a time where there was a very strong need to talk about sexual harassment. Most of the stories we get since 2006, since we started the project, until this moment is about sexual harassment. Whether it's sexual harassment happening on the streets, whether it's sexual harassment at work, um, from family members, all the things you can think of. Um, Women would either send their stories anonymously and ask to not be mentioned at all because they don't feel comfortable enough to have their names put on harassment incident stories. Some of the women were brave enough to openly and publicly step on stage and share their stories and say, "This is my story and I'm sharing it now with you." Now, people always ask, so what's the purpose of sharing the stories? I mean, what's the answer? What happens when a girl steps on stage and tells you how she was very badly molested by her school teacher? And this is what the project does that makes it very different than other projects. Um, and that is we're very concerned about how storytelling can be used as a tool for social empowerment, especially when it comes to issues as sensitive as harassment. Now, we live in a society that constantly feeds you thoughts and ideas that you are held responsible and it's always your fault and you have no right to speak up about it. And it is very shameful to talk about sexual harassment, or it's very shameful to talk that you were raped or sexually assaulted and all that. What storytelling does is it tries to tell you that all this is not true. It tries to fight this idea of you being held responsible. It tries to fight back the idea that you should be ashamed of it. And what it does is it makes people aware that sexual harassment is not just something that happened to one person, it happens to many of us, and we are not responsible, and it's not the end of the world. Um, one of the most um, uh, one of the يعني, most common responses we get after performances is from female members of the audience when they approach storytellers and they tell them, "Oh, this happened to me too. Oh, I thought I was alone. I didn't know that this happens too." So this is one way of creating awareness away from giving out flyers and creating awareness campaigns, because the emotional journey of the woman and how the experience affects her on a psychological and emotional level is very, very important. It's just as important as the figures and statistics um, about how many women were subjected to harassment and the types of harassment. It's always very moving and very insightful for me to hear a woman talk about how what she's been through and how she was able to face it and deal with it and how it has affected her life. And to also listen to women share the thoughts they get when they hear the story shared on stage. So this is basically what we do, or what we try to do through the Bussy Project. And it's an ongoing process. Sometimes we would have a performance created about sexual harassment, so dedicated solely to to performing testimonies of women about incidents of sexual harassment. And sometimes we would have a general performance with all different types of stories from women, but there's always this special focus about sexual harassment. Now, on a brighter note, uh, I do believe that there has been a difference. Where we stand now is very, very different than where we stood in 2006, not just as a project, but as as a society in general. Now it's a lot easier for women to speak up and say, "I was harassed, it's not my fault, and I'm going to stand up to whoever tries to do that again to me." Um, there are lots of people who now would step up and support women, unlike back before. I mean, 10 years ago, for example, it was not okay. So awareness is being created. A lot of projects are now functioning to combat sexual harassment, not just to combat sexual harassment, but also to address the issue, and to spread awareness about it in different places in Egypt. Because believe it or not, a lot of people don't really believe it happens, especially from the older generation. And because a lot of girls don't really talk to their parents about it, so sometimes you would find a parent who has a girl has been subjected to sexual harassment, but he thinks sexual harassment doesn't happen. And this is where really awareness campaign steps in and does a big difference. To ask people of what is it that they can do to help. What is it that would be like a call for action? I would say talk about sexual harassment. Talk to the women you know if you're a male. Ask them how they feel. Ask them how often they go through it. Try to understand it. And if you're a woman, don't be ashamed to share your experience with other women. It's very important that we learn that we are not alone. It's very important that people know what sexual harassment is about, and how it feels like for a woman to be walking down the streets. And this is not just a call for action in Egypt, it's a call for action everywhere because I've learned through the work of the Bussy Project that harassment is a universal issue, even if it differs from one country to the other. But every single time we perform abroad, we receive feedback from audience telling us that this is not just in Egypt, and that even though the experience might be different elsewhere, but the emotional journey and the emotional effect is the same on women everywhere. So talk about it, learn about it, and do not be ashamed to call it what it is. It's called sexual harassment. It's not called catcalling, it's not called stalking, and it's not called, oh, a guy gave me a comment while I was passing by, or a guy touched me. No, it's called sexual harassment. Usually, most of our stories are performed on stage in the form of monologues, and some of them are performed in the form of sketches. What you're about to see and hear now is just a selection of three very short stories. We decided to do a short reading of them to give you an example of what the Bussy Project is about.